Well, in the second part of Akua, yeah, we're talking about the mana associated with Akua, and another very important element in understanding Ho'omana Hawaii, or Hawaiian so-called worshiping spirituality, is the concept of what's called kino lo. Yeah, kino lo. The word kino means any kind of physical form of the body. Lo is one of the words that we have, which means a high multitude, and generally we use the number 400 to represent lo. So literally 400 bodies, but what it really means is that you have this multiple and multiple forms of body, yeah, the physical forms, and these are understood as physical manifestations. They could be symbols, they could be signs, omens, feelings, sounds, smells, anything with your so-called empirical knowledge that would reveal themselves to you. And more common, of course, we can think about seeing particular maybe coming into contact or the presence of certain animals, maybe an owl, maybe it's the sign in a rainbow, maybe it's the sound of thunder, or anything that you can think of would be explained as being a physical manifestation of the so-called akua. And so they also symbolize the power that these akua may have. So anytime we hear people talk about kinola or body forms, this is what they're talking about, is that the expression, for example, like the god Kane, may express themselves in a rainbow. And again, if you think about a rainbow, what makes up a rainbow? Well, a rainbow, besides being so beautiful, represents the mixture of light, yeah, the sun, of course, with the sky, yeah, the reflection from behind, of course, with water, which reveals the light spectrum. Hence, rainbows or anuenue many times symbolize this presence of the god Kani, the ancestral god Kani. Um, and yeah, so so rainbows can symbolize many things, of course, depending on where you see. If you see rainbows towards the ocean, you're going to get off in your canoe, where you realize rainbows represent perhaps a storm that's out there or a change in emotion and feeling. If you think about well, like one of the common stories we will find is that you see the rainbows representing our highest ranking ali'i, yeah, who are in many ways divine in their own presence through their genealogy. And one of the stories is that a way you can tell that's a particular high ranking ali'i in areas that you will have not just one rainbow, but two, just like the story of Umi. Now, one of the important kind of examples of being able to manifest in its various physical forms is the story of Kamapua'a. Now, Kamapua'a literally means the child pig or pig child. And Kamapua'a is a very important hero, demigod that you find in our older literature and stories. He's usually associated with the island of Oahu, especially on the Ko'olau, yeah, the wet side of the island, the windward side. And he's many times also a representative or hero for the common farmer. And as the basic story goes, and we were very brief, yeah, Kamapua'a said to be born, and he wasn't really born formed. He was kind of, the way they described it was almost like a piece of rope. And he was taken and he was basically was going to be thrown away. And the grandmother rescues him. And when he's placed on an altar, and he eventually he develops into this child where his grandmother raises him. Again, very important motif in Hawaii, where a grandmother will always love you for whoever you are. And he raises himself under his grandmother's tutelage. He's given many powers. In fact, one of the powers he's given is the power of prayer. And one of the interesting things about Kamapua'a, he's kind of like a Hercules kind of figure. And he, or Maui maybe kind of figure. But one of the things he can do is he can transform himself into different forms or manifest himself. As you can see in the images here above, he could be a very, very handsome, wild-looking man. He could transform himself to a very old, sickly pig, a little piglet, or it could be a very ferocious, huge pig that actually had 8 eyes. Um, he could plow the fields for farmers. He excelled in one of the favorite things was to steal chickens from the great king Olopana, the ali'i nui of Windward Oahu Ko'olau. And again, you can see why would he steal chickens from the ali'i nui? And again, it's like he is this hero for the common person, almost like a Robin Hood character who goes to the royal chicken pen and steals the ali'i's chickens, and he's pursued by the warriors or guards. And Kamapua'a always escapes, and the way he escapes is actually to transform himself. He can transform himself into various kind of shapes of pigs. He could transform himself into a kukui tree, like we have this image here, the candle nut tree. And if you look at the candle nut tree, the leaves of the candle nut tree is like the snout of a pig. He could transform himself into the ocean where he would escape and become a humu humu nuku nuku apua. And again, if you look at the front of that fish, it looks very like a pig also. So again, there's either child pig kamapua who also become um, almost the opponent of Pele in many different contestations, and sometimes as a lover, depending on the story, and sometimes actually as a very bad person. Um, but the point is that many of our stories, that and not so much an idea of a shape shifting, but it's pretty similar. But it also means that even in the natural world, that if you may see certain things, whether it's a rainbow, you might see a kind of form. You might expect that to be a representation, a symbolic representation of that ali. And so, especially if you have ceremonies, right, you would use those manifestational those forms, yeah, as offerings or prayers and so forth. Not a goddess Pele, of course, is a great example of this. Sometimes called Madam Pele, Tutu Pele, and you can hear when it's called Tutu Pele. But Pele, the word itself means volcanic action. It's the word for lava, as you would say. So anything that's tied into volcanic action, from the lava flow itself, the fire, the smoke, the embers, the flow, you call Tutu's Pele's hair, yeah, even these things that are all associated with the goddess Pele. And she also could transform herself depending on the situation in various ways. Yeah, she could be a very, very beautiful maiden. She could also be a very, very old woman. And in many of our stories, it's that form, especially as an old woman, which would come upon people or a village and so forth and tell them that she'll be visiting, which meant that she would be coming, and that would always kind of be a sign that the eruption would occur. So when we think about the volcanoes, when we think about the steam, when you think about the actual lava flow itself, the flow that may go to the ocean, that's all the realm of Pele. Another very, very important concept of Ho'omana is really the basis, you can say the foundations of Hawaiian Ho'omana, and this is the idea of Aumakua. And you notice the root word makua in Aumakua. Makua means parent, but Aumakua are your ancestral, deified ancestors generally. Yeah. Generally, they're blood relations, although, as I was taught also, it could be imported figures in your family that may have played a very important role in really being a guardian of who you were. And so these are family, personal gods of family, deified ancestors. And as we say in Hawaii, you have 40,000 akua for 40,000, ohana, 40,000 families, that you have these different akua who are generally ancestors, right? And so many of us who are related will have the same ancestral deified personal god for the family. In fact, many of the Pele families, especially if you're from Kau or South Kona or Puna, you may have an ancestor in your genealogy that may be a descendant of in the recording of so-called Pele. And these aumakua again could manifest in all different forms. They really don't have one form. Yeah. Again, you can see that some examples: mano, which is a shark; puel, which is an owl. And in fact, many times some people will talk about owls as being guardians that will warn you of danger appearing. So even to this day, if you see an owl or a pack of owls flying near you, in a sense, it's kind of telling you to just be maka'ala, as we say, be aware. Just kind of pay attention to what's going on. Elepayo, yeah, a particular bird that would fly, especially help to secure the right wood to be used to make into a canoe. Yeah, the elepayo bird would come, and if it pecked on a particular tree, it was a sign that tree was no good. Alaihuapi, the mud hen, the he'e, the octopus, puhi, the eel, the iole, the rat. In fact, iole, many times, if you have an iole as an ancestor, you probably come from a family that may have been involved with thievery, as the rat was kind of associated with those kinds of ohana. Pe'elua, the caterpillar, pohaku, any kind of rocks, leho, shells, owl, clouds, and any kind of trees or rocks would all be forms of various akua. Yeah. The main important lesson of an aumakua is that they're ancestral, so they're there to whether it's inspire you in your arts, whether it's to warn you from danger, whether it's to guide you to make the right decisions. And in Hawaiian sense, we always believe the aumakua are always with you, even in our physical form. You see, as we say in Hawaiian, that your na'au, yeah, your midsection, your so-called stomach, your opu, your na'au, This is where your ancestors will speak to you. And if you think about it, yeah, when you do something wrong, how do you know you got wrong? You did something wrong. It's not you're gonna get a headache. Many times you have an upset stomach. You get nervous. Where do you feel it? You fall in love. Where do you feel it? This is a seat of your aumaku that will speak to you to give you so-called instinct and intuition, which is ancestral. If you think about how we have instinct, how it's developed from years and years and years back into the ancient time past, that knowledge has been passed genetically into us in Hawaiian belief. That presence of that aumaku is within us. And so it's constantly speaking to us. Some things about the aumaku that you see around, yeah, so it's, the manifestations is that you did not harm your aumaku. In other words, if you had a particular shark aumaku, you shouldn't be out there fishing and trying to kill sharks, yeah, because the shark, in fact, is that which will guard against you, protect you, yeah. And the idea of the ao makua, that when we pass on, we ourselves, when we go to Po, we become ancestral, deified ancestors ourselves. Now, Po, as we go back even to the Kumulipo, um, generally means darkness, yeah, but it really is, it's the expression of that which we cannot experience, yeah. Think of that which is beyond this realm, yeah. What I can see in the light, that's ao. But what I can't see may be there. In fact, in Hawaiian philosophy, it is there. There are things around us that we cannot see. We may feel in different ways. Yeah, there are sounds that come about that we cannot hear, or smells. Well, we know this is true also in the animal world, right? We know that particular animals can hear at different pitches at sound waves that we as humans cannot hear. So it's not that the sound doesn't exist, it's that we don't have the capability in our owl. Yeah, those are all part of Po. Um, Yeah, and so Po is not it's in a closest association. Sometimes people are referred to like a heaven, and so it's not like a place that's way out. The Po is that which is all up of it, all around us at all times, everywhere, at all times. And this is the words from the great Kavena Pukui, taken from Nana Ikikumu. We're gonna have some assignments out of that book there. But as she says in this section, this actually comes from the Aumakua section that you can find in your readings. Yeah, there is a sea of time. Think of the word sea of time. So vast, man cannot know its boundaries. So fathomless, man cannot plumb its depths. Into this dark sea plunge the spirits of men released from their earthly bodies. The sea becomes one with the sky and the land and the fiery surgings that rise from deep in the restless earth. For this is the measureless expanse of all space. This is the timelessness of all time. This is eternity. This is Po. Again, spaceless, timeless, eternity. That's all Po. In Po, there dwell our ancestors, transfigured into gods. That means supernatural. There are forever God's spirits possessing, and what do you mean by that? Of course, not in a physical form. Yeah, possessing the strange and awesome powers of gods. Yet, they are forever our relatives, having for us the loving concern a mother feels for her infant or grandfather for his firstborn grandson. As gods and relatives in one, they give us strength when we are weak, warning when danger threatens, guidance in our bewilderment, inspiration in our arts. They are equally our judges, hearing our words and watching our actions, reprimanding us for error and punishing us for blatant offense. For these are our godly ancestors, these are our spiritual parents, these are our almakua. You and I, when our time has come, shall plunge from our lena, these are these jumping off spots, yeah, into Po. If our lives have been worthy, our aumakua will be waiting to welcome. Yeah. So again, it's whole idea that when you pass on, you return. You see, in Hawaii we say mai kapoho e kapo. We come from Po and we pass on, we return to Po with our ancestors. Yeah. And if you do well and you do things in a righteous way, when we pass on, you go and you get to go back to Po. Yeah. Now, what happens, in fact, if you don't do well and you're, in a sense, rejected, the Hawaiian version of heaven, I'm sorry, of hell, would be that you would wander aimlessly like spirits upon the land. In fact, the punishment is that you'd always be hungry. You're always be looking for food, eating whatever kind of bugs and creatures that you can find under rocks and so forth. So this idea of always being hungry, that's the Hawaiian sense of hell. But Po is something, again, we think about our ancestors are always around, and we ourselves in physical manifestations have a direct, not just a direct connection of Po, but we are inspired. Yeah, what inspires us to do arts again? What gives us courage when we need courage? What gives us guidance to make the right decisions? Right here. Yeah, you know many times in Hawaiian thinking. And so that's why the idea that you ask your ancestors for guidance, for protection. Yeah, and again, the protection can come in many different forms. Maybe it's a sign, maybe it's a feeling, maybe it's a sound. Yeah, that they may be able to help provide you that kind of guidance. Sometimes modern language will kind of talk about aumaku almost as if they're guardian angels. They're your fairy godmother, perhaps in that kind of sense. And so these are not concepts that are totally foreign from us. These are concepts that in the Hawaiian way are very very foundational to our ho'omana, yeah, to our so-called spirituality, which is ancestral in a sense of not just respect for your ancestors, but understanding who we are today, our direct connection to the ancestors that go unbroken. And just some examples of this is part of the story of Hi'iake Kapolio Pele when Hi'iake is going off to fetch the lover of Pele, her older sister, and on this great quest, she has to struggle and fight and combat all these different Akua and Aumaku and Kupua that define her all over the land. And as she goes on to battle, she needs help, right? So here's this Akua Wahine, her goddess herself, and so she in her pursuit of doing what she needs to do, she needs support. But what does she do? She prays herself. So this is an aumakua for many Hawaiians who prays to her aumakua. So you can see these are levels that even our gods and goddesses have ancestral gods and goddesses into Po, yeah, to the back of time. So in this chant, she's actually praying for her various ancestors that she calls out that take the shapes of clouds in the sky. In fact, what's called the dog clouds. Yeah, you see this word Iliu, Uli Okalani, something Iliu, Ula Okalani, but these are the forms of the dogs that appear in the clouds that she's calling to provide her support and help. I hear Kavaya Kani, where are the waters of Kani? In Hawaiian, I understand Kani is everywhere. Anything, any place you find fresh water, right? It might be in a stream that flows into the river, that comes into the lo'i, into the taro patch, even the kalo itself. It might be the clouds hanging heavy on the mountain. This is all part of the realm of Kane. These are all not just manifestations of Kane, but in a sense, this is the physical being of Kane in of itself. Yeah, water and Kane go hand in hand. Yeah, so fresh water, of course, which is most important for life, is part of the realm of Kane, the ancestral god Kane. The sense of really understanding, but I guess the closest word you'd use is the idea of what makes something sacred. Why is something sacred? Why we have this concept of kapu and noa. Now, sometimes people will use the word kapu as if it means sacred. It doesn't really mean sacred. Kapu doesn't mean sacred. Really, what the word kapu means is there's a restriction. There are prohibitions. There's certain kind of protocols that must happen. In other words, there's restrictions of who can visit, perhaps who can do, what can be done. It's like think about these are the what restricts, maybe it's access to a place, how you access a place. Well, the more restrictive, the more kapu. Yeah, so you start to see the correlation. In other words, the more restrictions you have, the less people and opportunities you have to interact with that place or a person, the more kapu that person is. So separation from the norm is really what the word kapu means. Yeah, so that's why you see the sign kapu mean like forbidden or keep out, meaning it's not just open for anybody. Now the opposite of kapu is the word noa. Noa means free. Noa means without restriction. So, a good example I always use is, if you have a modern ava or kava ceremony or drinking kava, you might hear the person who's mixing the kava might say, oh, he might say a certain kapu. He might say, these are the kapu. You only can speak love. You have to speak pot, whatever it might be. Or he might just say, it's noa meaning anybody can drink at any time. It's free from any kind of like restrictions or protocols that must be followed. Yeah. So the more higher the kapu, the more restrictive. Yeah, the more kapu. Genealogy is really are the basis for much of these ideas that we just, again, as we understand from the Kumulipo, that what makes divinity is the higher ranking genealogies that we all share. We are all related, yet we understand that certain lineages, certain lines have different couple, perhaps have different kinds of histories, have different levels of mana. Yeah, but we all share this one so-called genealogy that we come down to the various lines. And so genealogy plays a huge role yeah, in determining Kapu and Noah. It also, we understand again, it's not if you take it like the god Kani. So our so-called gods, if that's the best way we can use Akua, are not just these figures that are up in heaven. They're actually ancestors that we have where. Remember, DNA, we have a where within us ourselves. We are the descendants of our so-called Akua, which means that we have Akua within us. An important concept, of course, in Hawaii is the concept of heiau. Sometimes you might see the word heiau because the root word of heiau is the word hai. Hai means is to like make an offering. But heiau, there is no real one definition of what is a heiau and what isn't. You kind of got to really understand that it's more of the function that's more important than the actual type of structure. But at the same time, different functions will determine different kinds of structures, right? Obviously, if you're into fishing and you need a fishing place to make offerings, right? The fishing offerings are probably going to be given at a structure, probably a ku'ula that's right at the seashore. It's not probably going to be at the top of the mountain. Yeah. But let me just quote from Kamakau, as he says, yeah, a heiau can refer to a simple natural object. I read that, natural object. It doesn't have to be man-made. It doesn't have to be an artifact. It doesn't have to be an archaeological site. It can be in of itself a natural object. It could be a cave. It could be a particular rock. It could be the rain. In other words, it in of itself, it's a this is where we have this interaction sometimes with the holy world, right? Who want to determine what makes, for example, what makes something sacred or special must be protected on the land is something that you can show that is an artifact, right? Hawaiians built this hail, now therefore that's what's sacred. When of itself, it's not the hail that's constructed and makes that site sacred. It was the site itself already sacred. That's why the hail was placed there. Or even more specifically, we can look at examples of the top of the mountains. Yeah, this is the most common example. The top of the mountains are the highest to the so-called heavens. Those in of itself are that is the religious structure. That is the hail in of itself. So you don't. There is no need to put a hail upon the highest point of the mountain. And this is where we have these kinds of battles sometimes with archaeologists who say, "Well, I went up there, I didn't see anything." Well, you don't have to find anything to make it sacred. That the site itself, because it doesn't have hail, perhaps is the reason why there's a particular couple on that. Yeah. We have different kinds. We're going to look at some examples later, but I just want to kind of real quickly go over some real basics of the word luakini. Luakini, sometimes you see even modern Hawaiian regards to churches. And this is kind of considered the temples. These are the high level kind of temples that you might find, like you have at the bottom here at Pu'ukohola, or South Kohala. Or you might think of Ulupo on Oahu, or Kaniaki, or you can think of Mokini Heiau, or on Maui you could look at Haliki'i and so forth. So you think about the general large structure, that's the Luakini. This way you would have different kinds of offerings, different kinds of so-called sacrifices, including for some human sacrifices. And so let me just kind of touch real quickly on what we call human sacrifices. You can probably find, you can probably find in some stories, one or two stories where you can think about that classical notion where you went out there, physically grabbed a guy and took him off and sacrificed him, and to the so-called gods. For the vast 99.9% of when you think about human sacrifices, they're really humans that already had probably died or perished in battle or war. In fact, many times the first body to fall in a battle will be fought over to be placed on an altar. And so when you think about the word human sacrifice, generally again, it's talking about people that are already died in battle. Sometimes in the stories, they may have been, I guess you think like a capital crime perhaps was committed. Um, but we kind of get this notion that we got this hell and every hell people were just sacrificing. Not at all, you know, not at all. Yeah. Pohaku o Kane. Yeah, this is a rock of Kane. And many times these are large healing stones, maybe a large round stone that would have, it's a natural stone and was seen as being an important stone of mana. And as for, so whether it's for sickness or for health and so forth, the Pohaku o Kane was a common place of that kind of worship. Yeah. We have ko'a and ku'ula. Ko'a and ku'ula has to do with fishing shrine. Yeah, the word ko'a means coral. Ku'ula means to stand upright. And so many times, if you look in the ocean area, you might see an upright stone, kind of a phallic symbol, like Kane, the god Kane. And especially if you see coral or coral heads around it. Well, today, right, you might see on the seashore, you might see destroyed or semi-destroyed hea or kuula, where you might see there might still be the main pohako, the main stone that has fallen, or you might see scatter of coral and wonder, how did this coral get up here? Well, that's because that's a good sign that it probably was a small religious structure for fishing. Haleolono, for the god Lono, especially with agriculture, dry agriculture, with the makahiki. Halemua, which is a male temple, really where the males would go to perform their ceremonies, um, especially had to do with food and eating. Haleopapa, yeah, these are the female hails that you would find. And sometimes you see in our literature, you find physically, you might have in one valley on one side, you might have the Halemua, and the opposite side, you might have the Haleopapa. And if you remember the name Papa, yeah, that's Papa, the wife of Wakia. It might be an ahu. In other words, think about the word ahu means to pile. A pile of rock is an ahu. It might be a lele or a nu'u, some kind of tower that's constructed, usually of some kind of important wood of mana, like lama, where you have these high towers where you would make your offerings. And you know the concept of pu'uhonua. Yeah, this is a pu'uhonua is a place or a person of refuge. These are like sanctuary areas that you would go to, especially if you there was war, perhaps, or something bad occurred, or someone wanted to hurt you. You could run and find refuge in this pu'uhonua. And in fact, most times, you know, these are places where the high-ranking ali'i would be residing, and many times the ali'i themselves could be a pu'uhonua, like Kahumanu. Now, David Malo's reading, and I took a couple of chapters out of that, one chapter, I should say, the worship of idols, just kind of make sure you read through that. You know, not going to get too deep into that, but it gives a kind of a better idea about Hawaiian religion. You know, one man had one god, another had an entirely different one god. Yeah, females had their own akua also. In fact, males would also pray to female akua. Yeah, four major gods: Kulo, no Kane, Kanaloa. And the most important part, of course, your akua or your god or ancestral god that you presided over your occupation would be the person you would make your pleas to for support, help, and guidance. In fact, this image here is an image of Ku Kailimoku, who was the family war god, which had eventually be passed down to Kamehameha, which goes all the way back many generations. But if you take a look at this image, you can see, yeah, it looks like a war god. Its purpose is to make you fear. Its purpose is to show you uh, the preparation for battle and war. Yeah, if you look at the eyes, look at the mouth, look at the snarling teeth, the nose. Yeah, these are examples to show you that you're ready to fight. And hence, and the thing to remember is that what Malo also talks about is that they're not physical, they're not the actual physical representation of the akua. Yeah, they're what they're showcasing is the attributes. Yeah, not the physical, the attributes of the akua. And we all have different akua that he talks about also. Yeah. Again, the idea of 40,000 gods, you could have both rock images or carved wooden images that might represent the Akua, especially if you're making prayers that the presence or the essence of the Akua would be called to enter. But again, is to resemble how they function versus what they physically look like. And the festival of Lono, the Makahiki festival, this is tied to the god Lono, and the Makahiki, which means year, was the annual harvest festival. Generally started about October, November-ish, and ends probably about February-ish. And this is the time of the year where, as it says, the celebration of life. This is really the fruits of labor of the whole year will be celebrated. And generally, of course, we know in Hawaii, this is when the rainy season is here. So you wouldn't really do anything big and important. It said that war was what did not happen during this period, not large major work. You had sports tied into Akua Lo and Akua Pa'ani, where the tributes would be offered, and they would take this Akua Lo around from to each and every Ahu Pua'a, yeah, lands, where people would come forward to showcase what bounties they have of the land and would made as offerings, where the Ali'i Nui would gather and partake. Yeah, it's tied, and again with winter, many times tied with southern parts of the islands, the Kona side, and the celebration of the canoe at the end, where they would pile the fruits of the labor onto this canoe and they would send out into the ocean to honor the god Lono. Okay, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to do a third piece, a little shorter piece. So stay tuned.